Okay, we're back. It's COMP2068, Advanced Web Programming, and we just finished talking about assignment, or the final project in the presentation, and a couple of technologies that I introduced to you that we're going to be talking about over the next several weeks. And now we're going to kind of continue our build. We're going to continue our build with, up here with Visual Studio. And the last project we had going on, which was, I believe, we ran COMP2068 mail pilot demo, which I'm going to bring up. If you want to follow along, there is a similarly named GitHub repo that I've got going on. So here's where we're at right now. So if I run this demo, right, the COMP2068 demo, I've got this, right? You should have this too. Okay, cool. One thing you should try and figure out, though, this is neat, but from now on, what I'd like you to do is meter how many frames per second you're getting, right? Because now, you know, as you go on, you'll notice that you make changes to your site, especially when you start doing collisions, and you'll notice that the frames per second drops, right? Now, we don't have a counter here, a frames per second counter, so we can download one. Let's do that. So one of the things, if you wanted to find a frames counter, is there's a site that's called, there's actually a library called stats.js. So if I go stats.js, here's where it is, stats.js. And it's a library that you can download from GitHub or you can fork from GitHub. Okay, stats.js. And this is cool because what it allows you to do is it gives you this performance monitor, right, like I have in my game, right? So, and it actually gives you a little a view of what the usage would be like. This is how you kind of meter it. Okay, let's put this in play. So one thing is you have to download and install stats.js. So stats.js would be this module. Okay, so let's do that. Let me download the zip. And again, you can also clone this as one of your repositories or whatever. I'm going to unzip it here one day when it finishes loading. Here it is. And it's down inside my downloads. Here's stats.js. I'm just going to go down to stats.js here for a second. So here's stats.js. Inside there, hey, look at this. I have a Bower file. This is cool. We just talked about Bower as a component, a dependency module that's part of the a Node.js. But it's there just to let you know that they do have a dependency thing. Okay, we have a utils directory, you know, and you also have a source file, which is what you need. The stats capital S JS. You want to include. We want to include this in our project from now on, right? So what I want to do is I want to minimize all this for now. And I want to bring up I'm going to stop debugging. And in here, in my files, we have a bunch of assets and so on. I'm going to add an additional script in here under my lib folder, right? So I'm going to bring up stats.js, drag and drop it into my game folder now, into lib. So I've got my stats.js, and I got to link it to my my game.ts file, and of course my index. Let's start with my index file. So everything gets linked in here. So I've got my game scripts, and I want to put my other library. I probably want to put it before everything. So I probably want to kind of give it a little bit of space. And I want to take my stats.js. So here's my stats.js. And I want to drag and drop it into here. So now it's linked into the actual module is linked in here. But, you know, just FYI, if we're using Typescript, is there a stats.js Typescript file that I can download, a type definition file for stats.js? Well, let's take a look if there is, because we want to try and use Typescript as much as we can if we're using it at all, right? So I'm going to go to NuGet Package Manager, under this Manage NuGet Packages, and kind of look for stats.js. So I'm going to kind of look for stats with a capital S. And one day, may not find it. It likes not seeing everything online for whatever reason for myself. There we go. Start putting it. Just take a second to pull it down. So I'm going to look at stats and enter. I want to search for that. And one day it may or may not find what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is a stats.js TypeScript library, right? So if I look for stats, right, it'll retrieve all my search results. Hey, there's one. Fast stats, and there's a stats. If you look this one here, it says TypeScript definitions for stats generated based on the type definition library as an example, and it was done in 2015, February 16th, 2015. I want this one, so I'm going to kind of include this one. I'm going to kind of install. If this is the right one, then I'm going to have a new typing that I can include, right? And if I look down here in typings, right, now I have a stats typing. Here's my stats. And if I take a look at this definition library as an example, look, it's the same one. It's stats.js. And this is how small the type definition library is. It's really this small, right? So it tells me the revision number, my set mode, my begin, and my end. I have all this stuff, and it gives me the bare bones type definition library that I need to use stats with my JavaScript. Okay, but I need to include this thing. I need to include this type definition library in my game.ts file now, right? So here's my game.ts file. And if you notice, there's all these other typings. I'm just going to add this one in as well. Okay, so I can use this in my stats. Oh, cool. Okay, cool. I need to follow my instructions to inject my stats counter in here. So if you look on the file that I downloaded, I have some examples. And inside here, there's some basic stats counter. If I run this thing, it looks like this. And this is really the stats counter that I want, something like this, right? I don't want it themed necessarily, right? So I'm going to open this up in Sublime. And this is a good example of how this would work. I have to define a new stats. In my script, and this is the global namespace, I have to define a stats, some kind of stats variable. So I like this idea. I'm going to put this on the side when I'm working so I can see what I'm doing. And again, you're going to do this sometimes too. You're going to download and install new things all the time. I'm going to put this way at the top. So I'm going to go var stats of type stats. Hey, look, it picks it up, right? And I'm going to say it's a new equals new stats with a capital S, because that's what I have to put in there, right? So it picks it up. You should be able to do that too if you've downloaded everything correctly. Here's my Sublime. And now it says stats.setMode of 1, all this kind of stuff, this stats stuff that I want to do, right? And if you notice, I have a canvas and everything else, and I have a document. I kind of do the same thing I would normally do with a canvas height. I don't have to touch all this stuff, right? I also got a set interval, you know, this little function here where I do a set interval, a fill style, and I get the date, and I do a clear rect, and then I do a stats begin and a stats end. I need to get those, stats begin and a stats end, right? What I really want to do is I want to create my stats, right? My actual, my view for my stats, right? And if it says, look, if I say stats.setMode 1, and if you notice document.body.appendChild, I want my stats element right here to be on my document, right? Not in my game, right? So it's going to be actually in my HTML page. It's going to appear as a new element, right? That's where I want it to be, right? I don't want it to create this, right? I don't want to do this. This is just creating the canvas for me. I don't want to do any of that, right? And I don't want to create 2D context or my context fill style or any of this stuff, right? Clear context at clear rect. Any of this stuff is unnecessary, right? All I need for me to do this properly are these 3 lines. So this is what I need here, right? To append child to my DOM element. So I'm going to COM. And then what I'm doing here is after I preload, I do all this other work here, right? And before I hit main, right? Before I hit my main, I want to kind of set up my stats, right? So I can certainly call it in its own function, you know, set up stats. And I can definitely pull that stuff in there, right? Set stats.setMode 1, document.body append child stats.dom element, right? I can do that for sure, right? And then what I want to do, if you look at what it says here from a documentation perspective, is it says, well, this is cool, right? But I also want to do a start and end. Where do you think I should put this start and end? If I want to meter everything per frame, yeah. The game loop, in my game loop, right? So I'm going to put this stuff here inside my game loop. Start, stats.begin, and stats.end. So here's my game loop. I'm going to put this in here, stats.begin. I get some code hinting, right? So begin metering, right? And after my stage update, right? Stats.end, right? So end metering. I should probably put in a semicolon down here too. Okay, cool. That's okay. Let's see if this thing actually does anything at this point. I don't see it. My element doesn't appear anywhere on the screen, right? What was that? Well, no, because
there's a smaller box showing the stats, like in the example.
It should show up here somewhere, right? Because I'm adding it to I'm adding my stats to my screen.
Is it the method?
No. Here, I'll show you.
Oh, you got it working.
Oh, I'm sure you did. It's not that difficult. I'm saying let's see how this works, right? So here's my date time. I've got this piece. I've got my script. This is all that's in here, right?
Yeah, maybe it is behind your game.
Correct. It's behind my game. So how do I know it's here somewhere, right? But it's added it to the DOM element, and I haven't told it where to add it in, right? So I can reposition it certainly to the side somewhere or whatever. Well, I got a really good example of this if you guys ever have a problem viewing this thing. And if you don't know where to look, I have a really great example of this up in my on GitHub. Here's GitHub. And if I go to my, if you go to my site, I meter my my game, right, which is Starbase 12, right? So if I go to Starbase 12 in here, I have this same stats function running in here, right? So if I go to my game.js file, right, or my game.ts file, sorry, and I look at it, now it's much larger, right, and whatever, and this is what it would look like, but I do have a stats counter somewhere in here where I'm doing, you know, my counting, right? So here's my stage, right? And if you notice, I have my game loop method right here, and here's my handle progress because I do a progress bar. I've got my init, you know, where I do everything here, and then down here I have my game loop. Here's my stats begin. Oh wait, and here's my stats update, right? And I do this. Look what it says here: return this stat end, right? Or this stats begin and this stats end. I do that here, and then I have a setup stats. It's a little bit different. Set mode is 0, and I do a new stats. I actually do the new stats in here as opposed to the top. I don't have to do that because that does it every time, right? And then I set my position as absolute, so a little bit of code of styling before I do that. So let me just get all this stuff here from here on.
Where in the Starbase does it show the stats?
Hold on. I will show you. I'm going to copy this, go back into my file, and I'm going to put all this stuff in here. And I'm missing my stats. My stats stats mode, which is, I actually use stats mode as 1. So that'll reposition my stats. Stats mode is 0, stats mode is 1. Okay. And let's see if this works now, right? I'm going to refresh. No, I'm going through this one step at a time so that you guys can see that I'm not following what I've asked I'm supposed to do, right? What I'm supposed to do is I have to call the function every time I'm in my setup, right? I'm only calling it at the top. right? So go. Tell me where I have to. Tell me what I have to change. Stats in here. That's right. It's got to be in here somewhere, right? So I got to go setup stats, right? And here I call my setup stats before I do my main method, right? Because I want to run this thing. But if I call setup stats here before I run my main method, is that bad? Let's see. There it is. Right? Now it's way over there because this is where I've positioned it. So if you notice, I'm getting 57 frames per second.
Oh, we don't have collisions yet, so
Not yet.
you probably go down to like 45.
You want to keep track. This is a great thing from not a developer perspective, but when you're doing in development mode, not production, it's good to put it on. But you should certainly be able to turn this thing off. Like later on, we could set up a function so that way I can, on the top of my file somewhere, say turn stats off, right? Because we don't want to have stats on all the time because it takes a few cycles actually to have the stats going at the same time. But actually, it's a really good test because it tells us, if I was to look at the stats, it tells me, and if I click onto it, by the way, it'll give me other options, but it'll actually tell me how this works. Okay, so we've got this working, but I don't have any sounds. So this is the next piece I got. Does everyone have their stats working? No? So what did I do to make this work? Well, just like Jean-Claude said, I have to call my function here somewhere, right? So I didn't do that, and here's where I call my function. Here's the function that I've set up here with my, my right and top is where I want to put it. I could also put it, if I want this, my bottom and left, I could certainly do that. It's an absolute value. So if I want to put my stats counter closer to my game, right, and I'm not moving my game around, I could certainly put this at, let's say the top right of my game. What's the top right of my game? It's 640, right, because my game is 640. Maybe I'll push it a little farther out. So instead of 0 and 0, right? And right now my top right is 0 pixels, top right from the top, right? But I want to do top left. So instead of like my top and right, I want to do my top and left, right? And I want to change my 0 pixels to something like a 640. Let's put 640 in there and see what happens. If that's enough. So that's where it'll start, right? And I'll refresh. So I want my stats to be close, right? Isn't that better? Now, it's not exactly where I want it. Maybe I want to give it another, because I got a bit of a margin here, right? Because of my basic styling on my page. So that's why it's an absolute start. It's kind of overlapping. But I like to see it there so I don't have to look way over on the side when I'm doing my stats. Okay? If you like it on the right, where you see your plane, if you want it there, you can also position it there, right? So top left, and you can reposition your stats where you want it. I'm gonna update this to GitHub in a second for those people who can't get it, okay? So it's going to be at 640, let's say, plus a margin of another 10, so 650. And then my top, it's going to come down 480, right? So, sorry, 400 and, no, even less, 450 or 440. We'll try that and see how that looks. I'm just positioning my stats counter. 430. Let's see, I don't know. I want to see where it is, right? So, see? So we got my stats on the right now,
So when you
and
say 440, the top of the stack counter is at 440.
yeah, top left, right? And if you notice, I'm outside of this scroll of the screen now, so I'm right here, right? So, makes sense? So I'm actually seeing my little stats counter here, right? I can also see it in the top left corner of my screen if I want, if that's important to me,
How
right?
would you reset it?
This? If I click on it, all it does is it changes modes. I don't want this mode. I want this mode. So leave it alone. Okay, let's do sounds. So we loaded up our plane with motion. But I think it's important for us to include sounds right now. And how do we do that? Well, remember, if I'm going to stop debugging here for a second. If you look down, I have a, I'm setting up my manifest up here, right? So I want to add sounds, so I would do the same thing for sounds that I do for graphics. So instead of my plane, my cloud, my source, actually right now what I'll do is I'll go to Team Explorer and I'll go to Home, Changes, and I'll say, is that what you're going to say? I'm going to say added stats counter, right? And it's good to know your stats from a performance perspective. You want to meter your game a little bit, right? Because you want to know if your game is working as it should. You add a change and all of a sudden your game slows down to 30 frames per second. Something's wrong, right? So okay, so I've updated it now. You guys should have those changes. Now I'm going to add in my my solution for my sound, right? So I have my sounds. So here's my sounds. I have my audio right here, and I have a few OGG sounds. Well, the first thing I want to add in is my engine sound. So let's actually add them all in. Okay, so here's my, I'm just going to copy this thing here, this line, copy and paste a bunch of times. And I want to have my engine sound. I'm just going to define all these things. My engine sound, my yay sound, and my thunder sound. I want to have all that stuff in play, right? My engine sound is going to be here, engine.ogg. Ogg Vorbis, but you can make it any format you want. And you can go yay.ogg, and I can do a thunder.ogg, right?
So there's no explosion anymore?
Not for now. My explosion is the thunder sound, right? Okay, cool. So I've got those three things. I want to make my engine go. When should my engine go? What should it be attached to? Well, no, my plane. When my plane appears, my engine should start running. It should start making that sound, right? Okay, so how do I make this sound go? So it's got to be in my, inside my objects, it's got to go into my, my plane class, right? Here's my plane class. So when my plane is instantiated, then at the bottom here, I want to start making that engine sound. Okay, let's try this out. Here's how you do it. createjs.sound.play, and then I'm going to put in my engine sound. It's going to be called engine. That's it. Now, there's a problem here, and we'll see that in a second. Let's run this thing. And if I'm good, and maybe I'm not good, because I don't hear any sound. Let's see if I've done this properly. I'm going to go More Tools, JavaScript Console, and yeah, it says fail to load resource. My engine, my yay, and my thunder, right, doesn't seem that it wants to load, because guess what? I'm looking at images, right, and I didn't look at audio, right? So I got to do that. That's my first problem. So it's not looking at the right places, but it's trying to load them, which is a good sign, right? So here's my audio, right? You guys may have figured that out already. All right, and I'm going to save everything, and then from there I'm going to run it again. So let's just refresh this thing and see if I get my ugly sound. Yeah, look at my stats counter. Is it affected? Oh wait, where did my sound go? Oh man, it only plays it once. How come? How come? How come?
Is that a low and high end of the stats counter?
It will start over 60 times a second.
No, not the game loop.
Oh.
I'm putting it in my when my plane is created, though, right? So let's look at this, guys. I've got my engine. Let's open up this thing with TypeScript. Okay, if I open up my and get some code hinting, look what I get. It says I need a string. I can put in an interrupt. I can use a delay. I have an offset. Oh, I have a loop. I need to use this loop. And if you see the question mark here, it means it's a conditional. It's an optional is what it's called in TypeScript, which means I may want to use it or I may want not to use it. Well, I know that the way it works for optionals in TypeScript is that I can use them as little objects, right? So the way it would work is this. If I want to use everything in here, I can put like example 0, 0, you know, my loop for looping is -1, -1, 0, 0, right? I can put all the zeros in there, or I can just do one of these, engine. I can kind of put together a little object, right? And I can say loop, right? And my loop is at -1. Now, if I've done this correctly, right, I'm mentioning what it is. Is it loop or loops? I can't remember. Create.js. Is it? Let's check it again. Loop. All right, let's try this now. So I'm going to run this thing, and if all goes well, I won't have an error, and it'll run nicely. So it loops forever. Okay. So it runs, right? So I've got my plane running with sound now. Hey, take a look, guys. This is a great way of making a soundtrack. If you want to make a soundtrack for the same thing, you just make your soundtrack repeat indefinitely, right? So there's some free marks for your assignment number 3.
It's a lot easier than the way I was doing
Yeah, I'm sure. So that's one way to do it. Okay, cool. Now I want to add sounds for collisions. Uh-oh, I don't have collisions. It's about 1 o'clock. Do I have time? Yeah, I do. So here's where we're going to go. I'm going to be a mad scientist here for a second, so follow me, all right, when I do this kind of stuff. Okay, first of all, in order for me to do collisions, right, I have to draw this out for people who are online, unfortunately. But let's just do this. I'm going to pull up my, my fireworks for a second, all right? And I want you to imagine what's happening when we do collisions, right? I have a bitmap, right? And I'm going to bring up my plane. Here's my plane, right? And I also want to open up, some recent files I opened up before. And here's my island, right? Here's my island. Now I want to open up my plane's bitmap here. I want to kind of modify the canvas so that the canvas size is about, I don't know, 640 by 480, right? Just to give you an idea of what's going on here. Okay, so here's my 640 by 480, right? And my plane sits at the bottom here at around 430 pixels, right? So it's like right down the corner of the screen here. What? Right about here. Okay? All right, so this is 430 pixels approximately. And then I got my island, my poor island here. I'm just going to copy this thing and put it down here, right? And here's my island, and it comes down, right? Oh, yeah, it's on top. Let me just switch these. Here's my island. Do I have a collision here? Visual. Do I have a visual collision here? A visual collision. Do I have a visual collision there? Do I have a real collision here? Why? Because these two things overlap. Is this how I want to do collisions? Do I want to overlap the rectangles? It's not a good way of doing it, right? Now the other bad way of doing it it might work from a game perspective because if you come close enough, maybe you're not tell. But these objects are both kind of squarish anyway. Yeah. They're called hitbox. On Flash, it's a hit test or whatever you can do. Don't recommend. The right way to do collisions in gaming is to do, and especially 2D gaming, is some kind of distance calculation, right? You can also do, some people also do things like, well, if the top left corner of this box and the bottom, if this box is somewhere between the top left corner and the bottom right corner, then you have a collision, right? You don't also want to do pixel perfect collisions are bad because pixel perfect collisions mean you're checking pixel for pixel, and that's way too many cycles in a second, right? So distance collision, which means the distance between the middle of this figure here and the middle of this figure here, right? That distance is what you're checking. If this distance is a certain length, then you have a collision practically. Now, there's another thing we have to also consider, right? This is just 2D Gaming 101, by the way. If I put this thing over here, this is where this is going to come from. It's not going to typically come from over here, right? I'm going to make it so that I kind of roll over this island, right? And pretty much typically for the clouds too, right? Which means I want half the height of my plane and half the height of my island. I need to know these things because when I collide, it's got to be equal to less than half the height of my plane and half the height of my island, which means here I'm at half the height of my plane and half the height of my island, where they're touching. But if I'm here, I'm less than half the height of my island, half the height of my plane, because I'm measuring the distance, right? And I have a collision. And that's how I want to do it. That's easier for me. If I had a side scroller though, right, I wouldn't do half the height. I would do half the width because it's coming from this side, right? It makes more sense. So if I had an object that was coming over here, then I would want to measure half the width of my plane and half the width of because my objects would be coming this way, right? So I want you to think of that. I want you to think of, I need to create a distance formula, number one, and I need to create a collider, some kind of collision detection that I got to manually do because there is no collision detection built in that'll do what I'm asking. I got to write this stuff myself. Let's do it. So this is the foundation of what we're trying to do here. All right, so in order for me to write that, I need in my game, actually in my plane, I need to know the height and width. That's the one thing I need to. So I need to modify my plane class so it has the height and width. It captures that somehow. And I'm going to do that right inside my class, which is in here. So I need to know the height and width of my plane. Okay, so height and width. So it's width, right? It's the width property. It's going to be a number. And I need to have that in play. And I also need a height property that's also a number. I'm using number to type it in Typescript. Now I do this get bounds here, and I kind of do the same thing with my island, where I do width is equal to this dot get bounds dot width. So I'm going to do this, cut this out and put it over here, and I need to put this underneath here when I talk about my own properties. Right now, these properties up here, they really should be public because I want people to check them outside of my class. So I'm actually putting the first access modifiers in here for us: public height, public width. And I want to do this height and width calculation here. So this dot height and this dot width and this dot height, right? I want to do the same things that I'm doing here, right? Because I don't want to calculate this number again. I want to do it one time when I create my plane. I'm doing it once. And then, of course, I'm going to put the registration points, this dot width and this dot height instead of a calculation. These are just, they're actually contained here in the class. Okay, so that's the first thing I need to do. So I need to have a height and width. Hey, just to make sure, let's check to see if I have the same calculations here in my island class. And I do. I have my public height and width. I should type them as numbers. That's important, right? Because we want to get code hinting to give us errors if we have to try something else, right? So I want to kind of do that. I do have a private. I've set these as private and private, which is kind of good. I've kind of done the right work here. And let's check my cloud class to make sure I've done the same thing here. Public width. Let me type it as a number. Now it'll do type inference as well. But I don't want it to do type inference. I want to tell it explicitly what it's going to be. So it's a number. And again, I do the same kind of thing over and over. Hey, let me ask this question, right? This almost looks identical, does it? This, and this, and this, and this. They all look the same, right? I'll get back to that in a second. All right, so in here now, now that my classes are all fixed up and they have height and width, I can start doing a calculation. I need to set up a calculation, and I need to call this kind of like my first utility function. This is a utility function too, so I'm going to put all my utility functions in here, or utility methods, we'll call them, just to be object-oriented. Here's my utility method, right? And I've got my stats counter, and you know, in here, I want to put in my new method underneath my stats counter, and my new method is going to be something like this. It's going to be called distance, you know, kind of calculate the distance, right? And I need to calculate the distance between 2 points. Remember how, what's the formula for calculating the distance between 2 points? Do you guys remember? Math. I need the, yeah, what's the formula? Calculate the distance between 2 points. What's the formula? It's not the y. It's not the equation of a line. The distance between 2 points. Almost. It's actually x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus, plus y2 minus y1 squared, and the square root of that. Okay, so that means I need a couple of things. I need a couple of points that I'm going to get. And luckily, CreateJS has a point class, right? Just like Flash. Right, so I can say P1 then. I want to have a P1 variable come into my method, which is of type CreateJS.point. Okay, I need that. And I need a P2, the second point, which is of type CreateJS.point. Right? And now, inside here, when my function, right, I want to do one of these. I want to say, it's also, by the way, I got to specify my return here for my function. My method is going to return a value, and my value has got to be an integer. So it's going to be a number, right? And once I state that it's returning a value, I got to put a return into my method. And my return can be nothing. I can just return 0 if I want. But for proper, typing and code hinting, I should put something like this. Okay, I know I need to do a math.floor because I can convert everything to pixels again. Right, so I go math.floor. That's my first function. Okay, cool. And now I want to do inside my math.floor, I'm just doing this backwards. I want to do a math.square root, right? Math.square root. So that's the square root of, okay, and now I want P1 and P2, but I want to add them together. So I want to do something plus something else, and they're going to be squared, right? So I need to do math.power, right? Oops. And the same thing here, math.power over on this side, right? And of course, I'm going to say something to the power of 2, right? And then there's something to the power of 2 over here. Whew.
What is that?
Well, inside this is going to actually be some more brackets, right? Right? Because inside there, you got, and this is, I'm doing this all in one line, but what you can do is something like this. P1.x or P2.x minus P1.x, right, to the power of 2. And then in here, of course, it'd be the same. I would do P2.y minus P1.y. And that is your distance calculation, right? So the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. It's all in one line. Okay? Try doing this in C#. Woohoo! It's more difficult. Okay, so that's the answer. So this actual little distance formula, it calculates the distance between 2 points. Come on, buddy. Calculate the distance between 2 points. I'm going to use this distance formula a lot. So I got to make this very efficient. That's why I did it in one line. Sure, I could have broken this down, and I've done it in previous classes where I broke it down line by line. So I made the result is equal to, I made a local variable, blah, blah, blah. It's too much overhead. I'm going to calculate this every frame, thousands of times every frame. I'm going to do this, right? So I got to make this little code as efficient as possible, and that's why I'm using built-in functions. Okay. Cool, cool. If this works properly, I should be able to calculate the distance between 2 points right now. So let us make a function, another function we're gonna call, right? And it's going to be called plane and cloud. Plane and cloud. Okay. And this plane and cloud function is going to actually, I'm going to set up a couple of points here, right? And I'm going to actually put in, if you notice, P1, I need points. It's got to be points that I send in here, right? P1, P2, and so on, right? It's going to accept points, this distance formula, right? So how do I do that? Well, first of all, I want to know the distance between the 2 points. So I'm going to say, I'm just going to start my distance calculation, right? I want to put this, I need P1 and P2. Well, I don't have P1 and P2. Right? But I can declare a new set of points here. Say var P1, right, locally here, right, is equal to, so is of type createjs.point, right? I could do that here. And then I could say something like, I could do that here, and which is equal to a new createjs.point, right? I could do that here as well, right? I need to do that somewhere. I need to create the point somewhere, right? I could do that in here, or I could do that somewhere else. But let's just do it here for now. Because if I create it, I destroy it after the scope is done. Right? So it's okay. And I'll do the same thing. createjs.point, and is equal to a new point. So, but it's not defined yet, right? And then what I want to do on the top here is say something like this. I want to say, well, you know, P1.x is equal to plane.x, right? And P1.y is equal to plane.y. Need that too, right? And you know what? I need the same thing for my P2. P2.x is equal to island.x, and P2.y is equal to island.y. Huh? No, I'm checking. Oh, sorry, plane and island. Sorry, I want to change. I want to check plane and island first. Cloud a little bit more difficult.
I thought the island was for points, not
Yeah, but I still check it for points. I still got to make a sound when I pass over and go, yay, right? Okay, so here's my distance. I want to then check the distance that I want to put in here, and it's returning something, so this is not complete yet. So I got to put my P2 right, first, and my P1 in here, right? Check my P1 and P2 because I can put them in there, right? So now it's going to return the distance, and let's print it out for now. So I'm going to do a console.log, right? And I'm going to print out the distance between the 2 points. All right, let's see what this does, if this little thing works. All right, so I'm going to kind of, you guys got this? Let's run it and see what happens now, right? So I need that. Let's go into More Tools, JavaScript Console, and let's check also what my stats counter tells me. Right? My stats counter, no, it's doing that because I resized my screen. Okay, so my stats counter is working okay, right? But I'm not getting a kind of a printout anywhere of anything. Well, yeah, I'm not getting a printout because where am I calling this plane and island? Nowhere, right? I got to put it in my game loop. And you know what? I want to put it after my clouds have been created. So here in my game loop, I'm going to go plane and island, right? I'm going to call it in here now. And now let's run the stats counter and see how it affects my stats, if I'm efficient or not. It's important. Not bad. All right, let's refresh to make sure that I've got everything correctly. And let's resize my screen for a second to make sure that I get my stats. Okay, cool. Right, so is my frames affected? Not really. Okay, let's look at the distance. As I come closer, right, I can see that it works. I can look at the bottom here. I'm actually seeing that the total number, the distance between the 2 points, almost going to like minimum, right? Because I'm crawling over it. This is good. Okay, cool. So I know now that my calculation is working. I know my distance calculation. Well, this is my first collider, is it not? I can do this now. I can say, well, if, instead of this console.log, let's take this away. I'll say if, right, my distance, 0.1 and 0.2, right, is less than, right, is less than the, and I'll put a couple of things here, a couple of brackets, plus a couple brackets, right, and then put all that in brackets. And this is how I usually format my expressions, because that way I know for sure I'm not making a god darn mistake, right? And I have some issues because there's nothing inside these brackets right now, but I kind of formulated in my head how can I separate these things up, and before I get here, right? So now this is where I'm going to put in half my height, so plane dot height, right, times 0.5. Okay, that's cool. I'm doing this calculation every frame, right? Plus island dot height times 0.5. I'm doing times 0.5 because traditionally times is a little bit more efficient than dividing. Still bad. All right, and you're going to tell me if there's more efficient ways of doing this. And if it's true, I want to make a collision sound, right? So I'm going to say create.js dot sound dot play dot yay. Right? Yay! We're going to have an issue. I know what the issue is going to be, and you're going to tell me how to fix it, right? Let's see the issue. Ready? Here's the first collision. All right, so I'm going to play my yay sound, right?
Yay.
Why is it doing that?
Yay.
Yes?
Yay.
Because each time you check the distance, it's within that distance.
In other words,
So it's repeating.
the distance, these are so my island and my plane are above like my island's above my plane, and as my island comes with inside the plane, it's going to be true all the way through while it's checking for my plane. So then I've got to have some kind of value that is my plane colliding with my island. Is it colliding? Now there's a couple things I can do here. I can create an is colliding Boolean at the top for all my objects. I can do it so I can do something like this. I can say, my game stats. I can say, I'll call it game variables, and I can do something like this. You tell me if this is right. Island is colliding, right? And it's of type Boolean, and it's equal to false. Could I do this? I can do that for my plane, my cloud. Oh my God, I got to do it for 3 clouds. This is a problem, eh? If I want to check to see if it's colliding. I could also reset my plane, or I can reset my island as soon as I hit it, so I won't get that sound anymore, right? I could do that too, but that kind of looks weird. Boom, and also, and my first example actually looks like that. If you look at Mailpilot version 11, it actually just resets. But we're going to go another step here. That makes no sense to me, right? So instead of doing it that, what if in my head, I'm not going to reset anymore. I want to add a collider object, or is colliding, to my island. So here's my island class, and I want to add in another public variable, right? Here's my public, and I'll call it is colliding, right? So my island is colliding. It's of type Boolean, right? And I'm going to set it immediately to false, right? So is colliding. If is colliding is false, then I can play my sound. Oh, sorry, I won't play my sound if it's colliding, right? I check to see it. It's colliding. If it's true, I don't play my sound. If it's false, I play my sound. That's what I do. If it's not colliding, when I collide, I play my sound.
Oh, okay.
If it's already colliding, I don't play my sound again. Okay? So let's check that. Let's go back to game.ts and go in here. And now I don't need that global variable anymore. It's part of my class, right? This is where classes are really powerful, right? So now I say something like this. I want to play my sound, but only if it's colliding. So if, right? And now I know my island has that property. Island is colliding, right? If it's true, right? If it is colliding already, I don't want to play the sound. So really what I'm checking is if it's not colliding. So I can say if not is island colliding, right? Then, if that's true, that it's not colliding, then I want to make a sound. And I also want to set it to colliding afterwards. I want to say then my island is colliding is equal to true, right? Because it's just collided, right? Else, right? It's not going to collide anymore, right? As an example. So then I want to set it to false. Well, there's a problem here. Because if I say island.isColliding is equal to false, in here, right, it's always going to continue to collide. Because in here, because my distance formula would be true, it's always going to be colliding in here. Therefore, I don't want to do this else in here. I want to do this else out here. So I'm going to copy this out of here and put it over here, because it's got to be outside of my distance calculation, right? So I check to see if, as an example, am I colliding? In this particular case, because I check my distance, I would be colliding every time, right? So it's true, right? Else it's false, right? That's how it would work. And now I check I only play the sound if it's not colliding. Okay? Let's check that out and see if it works. Again, there's many ways to write this to make it nice and clear for you guys. So here's,
Yay.
see?
Yay.
Is that your voice?
Yay. Yay.
Do I see a drop in my performance?
Yay.
Not really. It's still staying at steady around 57, 50. And I'm running it in a virtual machine, right? So this worked. This is good. That means this is a good template for my collider for my clouds. All right. However, for my clouds, I got to check each cloud, right? So as opposed to just one island. I only have one island, but I have multiple clouds. So let's do this. And I'm going to create another collider called plane and cloud, right? Plane and cloud. And I need to pass in there a cloud of type objects.cloud, right? Because I'm checking to see the cloud now. I'm only one object, right? And now instead of island, I'm going to replace this with cloud, right? Because I don't care about my island anymore. Okay, cool. And okay, cool. This is good. And you know what? I wanted not my island height. It's going to be my cloud height. And you know what? It's going to be cloud is colliding. That's important here. And I don't have is colliding in cloud. Hey, I need to write that into my class. And it's not my yay sound. It's my thunder sound, right? These are all cool things. Let's go with my cloud colliding. You guys getting this? All right. I go to public. Excuse me, is colliding. I write that in there, and I make it a Boolean, and I set it to false. Okay, cool. I've done that now, and when I do that in my cloud class, go back here. This is okay. And now, when I check to see if it's colliding in here, I got to do a loop. Oh, wait, I have a loop right here.
Yeah.
So instead of making my own loop, I'm just going to check if this cloud is colliding right away. As nice and convenient, like this. I'm going to say plane and cloud, and I'm going to send in there clouds, cloud. Right, because clouds is the array, cloud is the cloud we're talking about, and I'm going to send the cloud that we're talking about inside the plane and cloud array. The plane and cloud. Cool? So this is done inside the loop. So I'm checking my plane and cloud every time I check my cloud. I'm checking for collisions. Okay, cool. Let's try this out and see if it works.
Same condition.
One thing we didn't change was when you're checking in the thing, you check for is island not colliding.
Cloud is colliding. Distance, plane, and height.
If the second if.
Oh. Can't have that, right? And you know what? I'm not happy with this at all. God damn it, I'm not happy with this. I'm mad at myself for programming this way. Right? Why am I mad at this thing?
That's not fun. That's not a bad job.
I'm mad, man. I'm really mad at myself. Why am I mad?
I only ever have one specific cloud.
Because I'm checking. I'll update this and I'll send it up to GitHub so you can see what I did. Why am I really mad? Why should I be really mad if I'm a programmer? If I'm a developer and I'm using object-oriented programming, hint, hint, why am I really mad at myself?
So much program.
I got like 2 redundant checkers. What can't I make it 1? That would be great.
Have like a comma.
Well, not really. Let's try this out. I can go like this. I can go, first let me commit. Added sounds and collisions, right? And I'm going to go home, and I'm going to go unsync commits and sync, right? And once I've done that, now you guys have what I have. Okay, I want to take these 2 colliders, this plane and cloud and plane and island, and I want to smash them together, right? Because it makes no sense. It's all duplication here. But what would I need? I need this. I need to check every cloud. And if I'm going to check every cloud, I need to check every island. But I can't do a cloud. Clouds and islands are bitmaps, but bitmaps don't have the is colliding method. So I can't do that here, right? What to do? Well, I've got the solution. Now watch this. This is mad science, and I'm going to see if I can do it in 20 minutes. Ready? Hold on to your seats, baby. All right? I'm going to go right-click. I'm going to go Add. I'm going to go TypeScript file. And I know that I'm going to make a TypeScript file called GameObject. Here's my game object. My game object right now is I'm going to model it after the biggest object I can. Right now, my biggest object is something like an island or a cloud. Doesn't matter which one. So I'm going to kind of copy my island class, copy this whole thing, go back into my game object class, and paste. Of course, it can't be called island. It has to be called something like game object with a capital G, capital O, right? Game object is going to inherit from bitmap. Yeah, that's cool. It's going to have height. It's going to have width. It's going to have is colliding. You know what? I need my cloud has both X and Y coordinates, right, from my cloud. Let's go back to there. Here's my cloud. It has DX and DY, so I need both those things. I'm going to put that in my game object. So I want all these things to happen, right? And I don't want to set them. I can't set them here to 5 because they're going to be different. And I don't want this one here to be false. I'm going to set that somewhere else. Right? Follow me here. Okay, I want to send my asset loader a different image every time. So I'm making a super object, right? So it's not going to be island. It can't be island or cloud. It's got to be some kind of asset string, right? Asset string. Well, I don't have an asset string. It's of type string, right? And I'm going to get that where? In my constructor. Right? So I'm going to go inside my constructor and call it asset string. Right? And it's of type string. So I'm asking for a string now in my constructor, right? This is cool. I want to do this. This is cool. I want to do this. Well, I don't want to do this. This reset is going to be different for everything. So this isn't going to be part of my super duper class. In fact, none of this stuff is going to be part of it because it doesn't make any sense. This is going to be unique to each of my objects. But these things here are common, right? Is colliding with, all this stuff is the same for all my objects. I know these things. And inside my constructor, I want to set my is colliding to false. So in here, so I'm going to say this dot is colliding is equal to false. I don't want to state what my dx and dy values are because it's going to be set somewhere else. So I got to remember that. Okay. So this is cool. I got all my objects that I need, right? I think. And you know what? I also need to know what my sound is going to sound like for different objects. Because for my sound for my island is a yay, and my sound for my cloud is a thunder. So you know what? I want my thunder sounds and all that stuff to be housed here, right? I want my sound string. So I'm going to do another public object. It's going to be called sound string.
Will it still
Right.
go to sound if you're going over an island and hit a cloud?
Yes. Right? It's a type string. It's an object. And what I want to do is this sound string, right? I want to set according to when I actually instantiate my objects. Okay, so I remember this sound string with height is colliding. All that stuff is what I need to put in there. Now, this is cool. Let us reformat our. First of all, let's add my game object. Let's do the proper things. I don't want to forget this because we're going to make big errors here. One change at a time, right? No, seriously, this is how it goes. You make big errors here if you don't do this right. Index.html, all right? I need to add my game object before all the other objects, right? So I'm going to go gameObjects.ts, put it in there, right? So it's got to be, this is the super object that all these other objects potentially could inherit from. All right, that's the first thing I got to do. Next thing I got to do is inside my game.ts file, way at the top, I got to inherit this object in here. I got to put the path to the object, right, to my game. So now I have my module and it's working. That's cool. Now that I have that, I've got my game object. It's called game object, right? Let's kill this for a second. Let's go to my island. Well, instead of my island, right? Instead of my island extending create.js bitmap, I don't have to do that anymore. I can say my island now extends objects. I could put objects to be safe. Game object. Whoa, that's huge. That's what a big change that is, right? Well, one thing I got to do is this is wrong. I don't want to send this whole thing, just the string, because I just want to send the island. So remember, I'm listening for the asset string is what I'm passing into my game object. So that's one. The other thing is this is good. I want to pass in my private dy, but I don't want to declare it here. I just want to say somewhere in here this .dy, right, inside when I instantiate my object, something like this. This .dy, right, is equal to 5. So when I instantiate my objects, and I want to do it here, and I don't need any of this. All this is defined in my super object. So this is all gone, right? Wouldn't it be true? And it says this is dy is giving me a problem. Why? Because that's a private variable. Well, if I go back to my game object, I can change this from private to protected, right? So I can go protected, and same thing goes here, protected. By the way, this only works in version in TypeScript version 1.4 and above. It won't work in 1.3. Okay, cool. So this is cool. I've got this. I've modified my game object class one more time, and I've got this stuff. Now I can see my this.dy and all that stuff here. Hey, let's go on. I don't need this anymore or this. This is all gone too, right? Because it's all part of my super duper object, right? But I do need to put in the sound of my collision, right? So this dot sound string, right, is equal to a yay sound, right? I need to put that in there. Okay, this all remains the same. All this other stuff down here. I don't need to touch any of it. Do you understand what I'm doing?
Yeah, you just take it over whatever.
I'm inheriting a class that I've already inherited from another class. It's multiple inherit. It's like in a hierarchy, I'm inheriting twice. So now my plane is a game object, and it is a bitmap as well. It has both those relationships. Okay, let's do the same thing for cloud really quickly before we get kicked out of here. So here's my cloud object. I can do the same thing. Instead of extending my create.js bitmap, I'm going to change this to objects. You can do the same thing with me here. Objects dot game object, right? And I can get rid of all this stuff because I've already defined it all. All this stuff gone. And now all I have to send is my string in here, right? So I clear all this stuff in here because it's already being done for me, right? And I'm going to send all this stuff away too because all that's been done, right? Isn't that so nice? And then this is the sound that I got to add in here, right? So I go to this dot sound string. Well, that's equal to thunder, right? Makes sense? And that cloud class is done. All right, nice and neat, don't you think? I think Rob would be happy with
Are
this.
you still mad?
I'm not mad yet. I'm still mad because I haven't implemented these things yet. Okay, this is one part one. Okay, so now my game and my plane and my everything's changed. And you know what? I don't have to modify these things because these are good, right? They're still of type plane and type island, but plane and island inherit from game object. Okay, cool. This is good. Now we're at the point now where I want to test out. I want to test out whether it works just like this without making any changes. Because remember, we made a lot of changes here, right? Let's start this off. Make sure it works.
You're forgetting to set the DX and DY for the cloud.
I never had to do that. Let's make sure. Let's refresh.
Yay.
It's such an excited
Yay. Yay.
Okay, all that still works. We're still good to go. Okay, now let's make one collider. So now we can go make one collider. We have all the piece parts we need. I'm going to base it off the cloud collider because this plane and island doesn't make any sense. So here's how I'm going to do. I'm going to take the cloud collider, right, and I'm going to modify it. Instead of calling it a plane and cloud, I'm going to call it check collision, right? And it's going to be check collision between whatever object I get in here. So my check collision method is not going to be between the plane and the cloud. It's going to be the plane and, at this, my collider, which is going to be of type create.js. No, it's not going to be that. It's going to be of type objects.gameObject, which both the plane and the cloud is a relationship, right? So now I know that my collider is of type gameObject. So now instead of my cloud, it's not going to be cloud anymore. It's going to be called collider, and I'm going to replace all these things. Bear with me while I change all these things.
I think you remove the sound.
And this, no, I don't change the sound. I actually take this in there and I go collider dot sound string. Right? That's why I need that piece. Hey, is this going to work? That means I can accept anything in here now, not just a island or a cloud. Let me just get rid of all this.
So you can put more objects in the game object and have them collide as well.
Could, like bullets.
Yeah.
I can make everything a game object, right? I can have bullets as a game object, my plane. The only thing I want to avoid doing is having my ocean as a game object. Yeah.
So we can just delete the plane and island collider?
I did that. I deleted that, and now this isn't going to be that. It's going to be check collision, right? Check collision with clouds, and now this is going to be check collision, but I got to add in the island. It's the only thing that changes. Check collision, and inside here, it's going to be my island. Okay, cool. If that works, and I got no errors, and let me just get rid of some of this white space, I'm going to run this thing again, right? And now I've refactored, so I only have one collider. Let me just make sure this is good. Refresh.
Yay.
Right?
Yay. Yay.
You just have to do all of this on the wait side.
Yay? When you say it's good, I feel powerful now. Okay, this is like I've done multiple inheritance like kind of thing, right? Where I've done one thing after that. This makes me feel good about being a developer. When I can do something like that, when I can kind of go through here and I can create a one single collision. Look, it's called Chesh collision. La la la.
How did it still work?
Didn't, because I typed it. It was all called. Didn't miss it. I missed it. Okay, cool. So this all works. I'm going to update this to GitHub now, so you have all this stuff. So let me make sure that I got it all, and I want to add these untracked files as well. So added game object class and updated collisions. Yeah.
I know we didn't really have time to touch
We're going to do that next time.
Okay, also I have a question. So when you collide with an island, it's a yay because there's a coin on top of the island you collected, right? So with that collision, would you define an object disappearing like a coin object?
Yeah, so in other words, you make a coin object, like I did, right, for my islands. And the coin object, remember my version 14 of my mail pilot. Let me show you that again really quickly. Right? I have a version like that.
On your GitHub?
I'm not sure if it is. It might be. Right.
It's not on the GitHub.
It might be.
We have version 11.
And version 14, which is called final, or version 16. So here's my final version of Mail Pilot, right? And in my final version, which should be on GitHub as final, right? It does all this. Remember? Here's my Mail Pilot, right? And then what I do is I start the game, right? And I do this. Little instruction screen, right? And then I go back and I do my play game screen, right? That's me again. One. And I have my coin and I got some animation, right? And now when I collide, I pick up the coin and I get points,
Oh,
right?
that's why you have thunder. The clouds actually have thunder.
Right, but I actually have an explosion, right? Remember? Right? Huh?
And then you have the buffer time for when you're coming back.
So what we want to get to next week, and again, this is just before your stuff is due, right? And again, I'm trying to fit in everything in as much as I can. But what we need to put in here is something that we have missing. And what we have missing is a finite state machine, which we have to implement, number one. And we also have to look at putting in play something like, a scoring system, because I didn't talk how to do that. I will talk about it next week, but it's going to be like one day before this thing is due. So in order for you guys to look and see what this is, right? I'm just going to go through this for a second. If you look at version 11, which is what you're starting with, right? So here's, I got a few minutes left. If I go to version 11, so I go back out to GitHub and and this is the one that's on your GitHub right now, right? If you look at the actual code files behind there, you have a lot of the solution already, how to do this. You don't have to rewrite anything, it's there, you just have to modify it. I have a couple of things called states. And these states are all the different things. If I look at my game over state, it's like a game of its own, right? So here's my game over state. And I have my menu state, which is I make my menu. And here's my play state, which is just actually my game that I made last time, right? And inside here, I also have in my game.ts file, I have my state machine. I actually call in, here's my state machine. It's a switch statement that switches between different states. Here's my states. So if you follow this, methodology, right, you have everything you need, including scoring, right, to get your game going. All right, so it's all here. And also I have a couple of managers that I did things differently. I have something called an assets manager, which actually includes my assets in a sprite sheet, right? And I also have a collision manager where I took my collider class and put it in its own little, but look, I kept plane and cloud and plane and island separate. So there's some good code and some bad code, and I want you guys to use version 11 as a way of kickstarting your other project.
हो गया दूसरा